Imagine this for a moment. A 21-year-old walks onto a grass court in Birmingham as June begins. And inside 6 games, she has blanked her rival in the initial set. And if you had blinked, you could have missed how totally she destroyed someone who was expected to be at least competitive with her. 6 days later, she is raising a trophy. And the exact profile of her that tennis experts thought they understood 12 months before simply does not remain anymore. For the longest time, the scouting reports on this player read almost like a footnote. A promising hardcourt mover, someone worth watching eventually, the kind of prospect you file away and check on in a couple of years. Then she went to England and tore that file to shreds because over 3 weeks on grass, she put together 9 wins, beat 2 top 10 opponents, captured a professional title, and climbed all the way up to 29 in the world rankings. And when the Wimbledon draw came out and her name landed inside the seeded bracket, history had already happened before she had even hit a single competitive ball at the All England Club. Nobody from the Philippines, man or woman, in the entire history of professional tennis, had ever carried a seeding into a Grand Slam. And she did it at 21 years old, which is the kind of detail that should stop you in your tracks for a moment before we even get into what happens next. Because what happens next is genuinely complicated. The draw paired her against a Mexican veteran who has been grinding on tour since 2012, back when our young star was still a 7-year-old kid who probably hadn't picked up a racket seriously yet. 14 years on the circuit teaches you things that talent alone cannot. And this opponent has built an entire career out of making people deeply uncomfortable on a tennis court, not through firepower, but through something far sneakier. She steals your rhythm. She steals your timing. She turns a match into something that feels like it's being played at the wrong speed. And by the time you realize what's happening to you, you're already down a break and wondering where it all went wrong. And here's the detail that turns this into appointment viewing rather than a routine first round, because she has already done exactly this to our rising star once before. And the story of how it happened is worth slowing down for. Rewind to August of 2024, a hardcourt event in North Carolina. Our young player ranked outside the top 100 at the time, still finding her footing, still figuring out what level she was capable of reaching, while her veteran opponent was climbing toward what would eventually become a career-high ranking in the 50s. They met in the quarterfinals and the youngster came out absolutely flying, taking the first set 6 games to 3, hitting clean and flat, dictating every exchange, looking every inch the superior player on that particular day. And then something shifted. The veteran started feeding the ball deeper, slower, mixing speeds in a way that quietly began eroding her opponent's timing. Shots that had been landing right on the lines started drifting wide. Unforced errors crept into the picture. The serve, which has always been the shakiest part of this young player's game, began leaking double faults at the absolute worst possible moments. And the veteran rode that wave all the way through, taking the second set and then running away with the third, walking off the court having stolen a match that had genuinely looked lost just an hour earlier. That kind of defeat sits differently in your memory than getting blown off the court by someone clearly better than you. When you feel like you're in total control and then watch it slip through your fingers point by point, it leaves a mark, a very specific and uncomfortable memory of exactly what one opponent did to you on one particular afternoon. Now take that memory and drop it onto the grass at Wimbledon. A completely different surface, infinitely higher stakes, and a player who is by almost every measurable standard not the same person who walked off that court in North Carolina nearly 2 years ago. The transformation in between is staggering when you actually lay the numbers out. In January of 2025, she was sitting around 140 in the world. By March of 2026, she had touched 29. Climbing through that brutal middle stretch of the rankings, the 50 to 150 range, where so many careers simply stall out for years at a time, doesn't happen randomly. It happens through relentless consistency. And that's precisely what she delivered. Quarterfinals in Dubai, round of 16 at Indian Wells, round of 16 in Miami, all on hard court, the surface everyone assumed was her natural home. Then the grass swing arrived and suddenly everything people thought they understood about her game got flipped upside down in the best possible way. Birmingham was the opening statement. She entered as the top seed at a smaller tour-level event and dropped exactly 1 set across the entire tournament. That lone set coming in the final where she got pushed to a deciding third before closing it out 7 games to 5. There's a clip from that final moment. Her standing at the net right after match point, hand over her mouth, completely frozen for a second, absorbing the reality that she had just won her first professional title and done it on grass of all surfaces, the one place nobody expected fireworks from her. She arrived in Berlin the following week as a wild card ranked 35, the kind of entry most fans skim right past on a draw sheet without a second thought. And then she beat the world number 2 in the round of 16-75-64 against a player whose serve generates the kind of raw power that should in theory completely overwhelm someone who builds her game on timing and angles rather than brute force. The world number 2 finished that match with over 40 unforced errors. And a huge chunk of that came directly from the depth and flatness our underdog kept delivering off the baseline, never giving her opponent a single comfortable rhythm to settle into. That's not luck. That's a game plan executed under the brightest kind of pressure against one of the best players alive. Next up was the world number 8, a player whose defensive instincts usually smother exactly the style of aggressive flat-hitting tennis our heroine relies on. She jumped out to a 3-games-to-love lead in the first set and never let go, finishing it off 63-64 in under 90 minutes. 2 consecutive top 10 scalps inside a single mid-tier tour event where she had arrived as a wild card that almost nobody took seriously. The semi-final didn't go her way. A clean competitive loss to a ball-striking force who can end points before you've even had a chance to redirect anything. And there's no shame whatsoever attached to that result. But that entire Berlin run revealed something crucial about how she actually plays on grass. And understanding it is the key to understanding exactly what her veteran opponent is walking into at Wimbledon. On this surface, she takes the ball ridiculously early. That phrase gets thrown around loosely in commentary booths everywhere. But for her, it is the entire foundation of her game plan. She sets up well inside the baseline and meets the ball right as it's rising, which on grass, where the bounce stays low and the pace stays quick, turns her ground strokes into skidding, flat missiles that barely clear the net and stay near ankle height by the time they reach the other side. Think about what that actually means for whoever is standing across the net trying to defend it. Grass doesn't offer the same generous upward bounce that clay does. A flat strike on this surface stays low and keeps traveling fast and forward. When she rips a backhand crosscourt at shin level, her opponent has to dig the racket down low and lift from an already compromised position. When she redirects a forehand down the line, the ball arrives before the defender has even finished resetting her feet. This is exactly why her results look so wildly different depending on which surface she's standing on for wins and 6 losses on clay this season. Because the red dirt slows everything down and bounces the ball higher, giving opponents time to recover and reset. And those same devastating flat trajectories that wreck people on grass simply sit up invitingly on clay instead. On grass, though she's playing an entirely different sport, one that suits her far better than anyone seems to have predicted just a year ago. So, where does her veteran opponent actually fit into all of this? And why does the ranking gap matter so much less than it appears to on paper? Standing barely over 5 feet 3 inches and weighing around 121 pounds, she has never been a player who hits through opponents or generates pace that creates errors on its own. What she does instead, the exact skill that has kept her competitive on tour for 14 years, is deny you the tempo you're craving. She constantly varies the speed of the ball. A deep, slow push into the backhand corner, followed by a drop shot that dies just before the service line. An absorbed first strike redirected with just enough angle to drag you wide. Then a lob dropped into the exact space you just abandoned. Her entire philosophy is built around one idea: force the other player to manufacture pace out of nothing, then feed off whatever falls short of the mark against someone who thrives on rhythm and uses an opponent's own pace to fuel her game. This is potentially the single most dangerous weapon available to the veteran. Go back and look closely at what actually happened in those second and third sets back in Carolina. The young star was winning while she controlled the tempo. The instant her opponent yanked that tempo away, slowing everything down and dismantling the patterns she'd been thriving inside, the entire match transformed. She had to start generating her own pace instead of simply redirecting it. And her game shrank, got tighter, more hesitant. The serve started leaking double faults. The margins narrowed, and the veteran, who had absorbed an entire set's worth of punishment, suddenly looked like the calmer, more composed player on that court. That's the memory hanging over this matchup. That's the exact blueprint her opponent already knows works. But here's the problem facing the veteran, and it's a real one. The surface beneath her feet on Monday does not cooperate with her style of tennis at all. Her career grass court record sits at 12 wins and 14 losses. In 2026, specifically, she's 3-4 on the lawns. Her most recent grass tournament before arriving at Wimbledon ended in a qualifying loss to someone ranked well outside the top 100. And before that she lost in the first round elsewhere 61-62. These are not the numbers of someone walking into the All-England club brimming with confidence and momentum. The patient defensive style that makes her so dangerous everywhere else loses its teeth on grass because the ball simply doesn't bounce high enough for her to comfortably get underneath it. At 5 feet 3 inches, playing from well behind the baseline on a surface where everything skids through low and fast, she's constantly forced into reaching downward rather than swinging freely through her preferred contact zone. The geometry of the surface works directly against her. Every low skidding ball forces her entire body to readjust just to find a clean point of contact. And those constant micro-adjustments compress her decision-making time, which shrinks the variety of shots she's able to produce, which in turn makes her significantly easier to read and anticipate. Now, compare that with what the young Filipina has been doing on grass throughout 2026. 9 wins against just 3 losses this season alone. 24 wins and 11 losses across her entire career on the surface. A title, a deep semifinal run at a mid-tier event, and back-to-back victories over 2 top 10 players inside the same week. The sample size is large enough now that calling any of this anomaly simply doesn't hold up under scrutiny anymore. She is genuinely excellent on grass, arguably better here than on any other surface she plays. And yet the serve remains a real and ongoing question mark that anyone watching this match needs to keep a close eye on throughout. It was a problem back in Carolina. It was still a visible issue even during her brilliant run in Berlin, where despite hitting 4 aces in one match, she still hasn't developed the kind of consistently reliable power or placement on her first delivery that would make her service games feel routine and safe. The second serve in particular practically invites aggression, sitting up nicely in the strike zone and giving returners a clean, comfortable look at the ball. Her opponent on Monday isn't a powerful returner by any stretch, but she is an extremely experienced one, and experienced returners know precisely what to do with a soft-sitting second serve, stepping inside the baseline, taking it early, and redirecting it into a corner before the server has any chance to recover position. If the veteran can turn those service games into genuine contests rather than free points, this match suddenly becomes far more interesting than the betting markets currently suggest. And speaking of the markets, her opponent opened at odds, translating to roughly a 20% chance of pulling off the win, meaning the bookmakers have essentially already written her out of contention before a ball has even been struck. That kind of imbalance is worth sitting with for a moment, because when a player walks onto a court with absolutely nothing to lose and everything potentially to gain, something genuinely shifts in how they're able to compete. The veteran can play with total freedom, no weight of expectation, no anxiety about what a loss might mean for her ranking or her reputation or anyone watching back home. She can simply go out and play tennis. Our young seed doesn't get that same luxury. She's carrying the heaviest seeding any Filipino player has ever worn into a Grand Slam tournament. She's carrying the hopes of an entire community scattered across the globe. She's carrying the memory of Birmingham and Berlin and every single match this year that proves something new about who she's becoming as a player. And all of that is fuel certainly, but it's also weight, real weight. And Wimbledon carries its own gravitational pull that no warm-up tournament anywhere can fully prepare you for. Being the seeded favorite, the player the crowd has traveled across oceans to watch introduces a flavor of pressure that's genuinely unlike anything she's faced before in her young career. That said, she's already shown signs she can handle versions of exactly this. Witnesses in Birmingham described the atmosphere as transformative for such a small venue, with Filipino supporters turning out in numbers that completely changed the energy of what's normally a quiet mid-tier event. And she handled it. Played straight through the noise and the weight of expectation, and then went to Berlin as the underdog wild card and handled the complete opposite kind of pressure. The freedom of nobody expecting anything from her, converting that looseness into 2 statement wins over top 10 opposition. She's proven she can compete in both of those emotional registers already, which is no small thing for someone this young. Her opponent, for all her experience, is staring down a different kind of psychological challenge entirely. She's been here before in the broadest sense. She knows exactly what a Grand Slam first round feels like under the lights. She qualified for the French Open back in 2020 and became the first Mexican woman in 2 decades to reach a Slam main draw. She upset a top 6 player at last year's US Open in a 3-set battle decided by the narrowest of margins imaginable. And she's beaten players on these very Wimbledon courts before, reaching the second round here just last year. None of that paints the picture of someone who crumbles under pressure on the biggest stages. But knowing how to compete inside a Grand Slam atmosphere and knowing how to compete on a surface that actively undermines your entire game plan are 2 completely separate skills. And on grass, her best and sharpest weapons become noticeably harder to deploy and far easier for a sharp opponent to read coming. There is, however, one tactical wrinkle that could genuinely cause real trouble for the favorite, and it's worth understanding clearly before Monday arrives because her opponent possesses a backhand slice that when struck well on grass stays brutally low and skids sideways in a way that has created discomfort for plenty of better-ranked players throughout her career. And if she can land that slice consistently and force uncomfortable low contact points over and over again, the entire complexion of this first round could shift in ways the odds simply aren't accounting for right now.